and reverse the direction of rotation of the DC series, shunt and compound motors.
Hello and welcome to this session where we will be conducting the starting, running and reversing the direction of rotation of the DC series, shunt and compound motors. Let us now learn about start, run and reverse the direction of rotation of the DC series motor, the DC shunt motor, DC compound motor. So, let us begin.
Task 1.
We will first check the connections to start and run a DC series motor. It is important to remember that a DC series motor should not be started with no load. If started, the speed of the DC series motor will become dangerously high, possibly damaging the DC series motor. We will now view the circuit diagram that will employ to start and run a DC series motor. We connect the components as per the diagram given. The L terminal of the 2-point starter is connected to the positive terminal of the ICDP, which supplies 220 volts DC. The DC series motor is started with a 2-point starter. In the 2-point starter, we can see that the starting resistance is R. Then, the A1 terminal of the DC series motor is connected to terminal A of the 2-point starter. It is advised to use a flat belt drive because it won't slip while operating and the series motor needs a load to start and run. The series motor's A2 terminal is now attached to field terminal D1. The field's D2 terminal is connected to ICDP's negative terminal. Now that we see the connections clearly, we switch on the circuit, take the readings and note them in the table.
Task 2.
We will now examine the connections needed to run the DC series motor in reverse. We will look at connections of two methods. Method 1. Reverse the direction of rotation by changing the armature terminals. That is, we switch A1 and A2. Method 2. Reverse the direction of rotation by changing the field terminals. That is, we switch D1 and D2. We turn the ICDP on, take a reading, and then turn it off.
Task 3.
We will now check the connections to start and run a DC shunt motor. Starting a shunt motor at a heavy load requires a high starting current, since speed is constant and torque is proportional to armature current. To avoid this high starting current, shunt motors should not be started under heavy loads and should be started without any load. We will now see the circuit diagram that we are going to use to start and run a DC shunt motor. Likewise, we calculate the resistance of the starter's no-volt coil and series resistor and record the results in the table. The L terminal of the 3-point starter is connected to the positive terminal of the ICDP. The DC shunt motor's A1 terminal is connected to the 3-point starter's terminal A, and the field's E1 terminal is connected to the 3-point starter's terminal F. The A2 terminal of the shunt motor and the E1 terminal of the field are connected to the negative terminal of ICDP. Now, we switch on the ICDP and gradually move the starter handle to the on position. We check the direction of rotation and note it in table. Finally, we stop the motor by switching off the ICDP. Wait until the shaft comes to a standstill position.
Task 4.
We will check the connections to operate the DC shunt motor in reverse. we will look at connections of two methods. Method 1. Change the direction of rotation by changing the armature terminals, that is, we switch A1 and A2. Method 2. Change the direction of rotation by changing the shunt field terminals, that is, we switch E1 and E2. We switch on the ICDP. Take the reading and turn it off.
Task 5.
We will now check the connections to start and run a DC compound motor. Now, we will check the connections as per the circuit diagram to start and run a DC compound motor. We calculate the resistance of the protective resistor, the no-volt coil and the series resistor and record it in the table. We connect the ICDP positive terminal to L1 and L2 is connected to negative terminal DC source terminal of the 4-point starter, followed by the 4-point starter's terminal A to the D1 and D2 to the A1 in series of the compound motor. Finally, the A2 terminal and E2 of the shunt motor to the negative ICDP terminal. We turn the power on and gradually turn the 4-point starter handle until it is in the on position. We take note of the motor's rotational direction after observing it. The tachometer taken. The tachometer must be inserted into the center of the motor shaft. We press the start button on the tachometer. After 1 minute, we press the off button and take the readings. We note the motor's speed in revolutions per minute. By turning off the ICDP switch, we turn off the motor and wait until the shaft comes to rest. Therefore, we gained knowledge about how to start and run a DC compound motor.
Task 6.
We will check the connections to operate the DC compound motor in reverse. We will look at connections of two methods. Method 1. Reverse the direction of rotation of the DC compound motor by changing the armature connection. Method 2. Reverse the direction of rotation of the DC compound motor by changing the shunt field terminals and series field terminals both together. We switch on the ICDP, take the reading and turn it off. As a result, we observed how to start and run a DC series motor using a 2-point starter and reverse the direction of rotation by changing the armature terminals and the field terminals. Next, we observed how to start and run a DC shunt motor using a 3-point starter and reverse the direction of rotation by changing the armature terminals and the field terminal. Finally, we observed how to start and run a DC compound motor using a 4-point starter and reverse the direction of rotation by changing the armature connection and the shunt field terminals and series field terminals.